My brothers and sisters, words are not just sounds that pass from our lips. They are seeds. And when a seed is planted, it does not remain the same. It grows, it multiplies, and it produces a harvest. Every word you and I speak is shaping a future, building an atmosphere, and planting fruit that either blesses or destroys. That is why today our cry is simple: Father, let every word I speak bear good fruit. When God created the heavens and the earth, he did not use tools, he used words. His words carried power, and so do ours. Scripture tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. That means every conversation, every declaration, and every prayer carries weight in heaven and on earth. We cannot afford careless speech, because careless speech creates careless results. But when we align our words with God's truth, we release his kingdom into every situation. When we talk about speaking with purpose, we are really talking about living with intention in the way we use our words. Too often, people speak without thought, tossing words into the air as if they disappear the moment they are spoken. But the truth is, words never vanish. They plant themselves into the soil of someone's heart, into the atmosphere of a moment, or even into our own spirit. Just like a farmer who carefully chooses his seeds, prepares the ground, and expects a harvest, we must realize that every word we release is a seed with the potential to bring forth life or destruction. Speaking with purpose means refusing to let our mouths become instruments of negativity, gossip, or idle chatter. It means weighing our words before we release them and asking ourselves, will this word build or will it break? Will it bless or will it curse? Will it bring peace or stir up strife? When you speak on purpose, you align your mouth with the values you hold and the future you desire. Careless words are like throwing seeds into rocky soil. They may sprout for a moment, but they will not last. Purposeful words, however, are planted in good ground, and in time, they produce a harvest of blessing, encouragement, and growth. There is also a spiritual weight to this truth. In prayer, in conversations, in declarations over our lives and our families, words open doors. Purposeful speech opens doors for God's presence, favor, and peace to move. Careless speech opens doors for discouragement, conflict, and regret. That is why Scripture warns us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. To speak with purpose is to recognize that your mouth is not just communicating, it is creating. Consider this simple example. Imagine a teacher addressing a struggling student who feels like a failure. If the teacher speaks carelessly, saying, "You'll never get this right," those words sink into the student's heart, planting seeds of doubt and shame that may last a lifetime. But if the teacher chooses to speak with purpose, even in correction, saying, "I know this is hard, but I also know you are capable of learning this. Let's work through it together," the entire atmosphere shifts. The purposeful words plant seeds of confidence, hope, and determination. Over time, those seeds grow, and the student begins to believe, try harder, and eventually succeed. The same principle applies in our homes, our workplaces, and even in our private thoughts. When you wake up and speak purposefully over your day, declaring strength, peace, and gratitude, you set the tone for your actions and reactions. When you encourage your family members with intentional words, you build an environment of love and security. When you discipline yourself to replace negativity with purposeful speech, you begin to see purposeful results. Speaking with purpose is not about being perfect. It is about being intentional. It is about remembering that your words carry weight and choosing to use that weight to build the kind of life, relationships, and future that reflect God's goodness. Purposeful words always bring purposeful harvests. To speak what God has spoken is to align your mouth with the eternal truth of His Word rather than the temporary noise of your emotions or circumstances. Feelings are real, but they are not always faithful. They rise and fall like waves, shifting with every wind of change. God's Word, however, remains unshaken, unchanging, and unstoppable. When you declare His promises over your life, your family, your health, and your future, you are not merely speaking wishful thoughts. You are releasing the authority of heaven into the atmosphere. That is why prayers grounded in Scripture carry so much power. They are not empty desires, but living words already endorsed by God Himself. This is not to dismiss our emotions. We are human, and we feel disappointment, fear, and uncertainty. But when you let feelings dictate your words, you can end up reinforcing defeat instead of declaring victory. For example, saying, "I'll never get through this," or "Everything always goes wrong for me," is like watering weeds that choke out your faith. On the other hand, when you choose to speak what God has spoken, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," or "No weapon formed against me shall prosper," you begin watering seeds of truth that grow into faith, courage, and breakthrough. Speaking what God has spoken also repositions your perspective. Instead of seeing your situation through the lens of limitation, you see it through the lens of promise. When David stood before Goliath, he did not focus on the size of the giant or his own small stature. He declared confidence in the name of the Lord. His words aligned with God's covenant promises to Israel, and those words fueled his victory. The battle was not won with stones alone. It was won with words of faith spoken in agreement with God's truth. Here is a simple but powerful example. Imagine someone battling illness. Their feelings might scream despair, fear, and weakness. If they only speak what they feel, they might say, "I'm getting worse every day," or "I'll never recover." But if they choose to speak what God has spoken, they declare, "By His stripes I am healed," and "The Lord is my strength and my shield." While the illness may not disappear instantly, those words create an atmosphere of faith, hope, and healing. They become a weapon against discouragement and a reminder to the soul that God's word is greater than any doctor's report. Over time, those declarations not only strengthen the spirit, but can also influence the body and the mind toward restoration. The point is this: your tongue can echo your fear, or it can echo God's promises. One will chain you to defeat, while the other will unlock victory. When you speak what God has spoken, you step into agreement with His will. An agreement with God always brings fruit. His word never returns void. And when you let your lips carry His truth, heaven responds and earth aligns with the power of His promises. To speak to build and not to break is to recognize that words are tools, and tools can either construct or destroy, depending on how they are used. Every conversation we have carries the potential to either lift someone higher or to weigh them down with discouragement. The tongue is small, but it wields tremendous power. When used recklessly, it can scar hearts, crush spirits, and leave lasting wounds. But when used with care and love, it can heal, restore, and strengthen even the most broken soul. Speaking to build means being intentional about planting hope, encouragement, and truth into the lives of others so that they can rise into the fullness of who God created them to be. So often in life, people are already carrying heavy burdens, worries about their future, disappointments from their past, or struggles in the present. Harsh or careless words only add weight to what they already bear. But when you choose words that build, you become a source of light in their darkness. A simple phrase like, "I believe in you," or "You're stronger than you realize," can spark a fire of courage in someone who was ready to give up. Building words don't ignore reality, but they redirect focus towards strength, hope, and possibility. There is also a responsibility here. Words spoken in anger, sarcasm, or bitterness can do damage far beyond the moment. They echo in the mind of the listener long after the conversation is over. That is why it is vital to pause before speaking and to ask yourself, will these words contribute to someone's growth, or will they tear them down? When your goal is to build, you take on the role of a builder who carefully lays stones one by one, constructing something strong and lasting. Speaking to build doesn't only apply to others, it also applies to yourself. Many people sabotage their own future by constantly speaking words of failure over themselves. "I'll never succeed," "I'm not good enough," or "things will never change." These self-inflicted wounds weaken the foundation of hope and faith. But when you intentionally speak words of affirmation rooted in God's truth, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made," "I am more than a conqueror," "God is with me," you build an inner structure of confidence that can withstand life's storms. A powerful example of this can be seen in a family setting. Picture a child who brings home a poor grade on a test. If the parent says, "You're so lazy, you'll never get anywhere," that word tears down the child's confidence and may convince them they are incapable of learning. But if the parent chooses instead to say, "This test was tough, but I know you can do better because I see how smart you are. Let's study together and try again. The entire atmosphere shifts. The child not only feels encouraged, but also gains determination to improve. One approach breaks, the other builds. At the heart of this key point is the truth that every word leaves a mark. When you speak to build, your words become bricks of encouragement, cemented with love, forming walls of strength around those who hear them. Over time, the people you build with your words will grow into stronger, more hopeful, and more faithful versions of themselves. And in building others, you yourself are also built. To speak with faith and not fear is to shift your entire outlook from limitation to possibility, from defeat to victory, and from uncertainty to assurance in God's power. Fearful words are natural because fear speaks from what the eyes see and the mind imagines. They often come from the immediate pressure of circumstances, lack of money, poor health, broken relationships, or an uncertain future. Faith-filled words, however, do not depend on what can be seen in the natural. They flow from a deep conviction that God is greater than any circumstance, that His promises are true, and that His power is at work, even when evidence seems absent. Speaking with faith is not denying reality. It is declaring a higher reality that aligns with the truth of God's word. Fearful speech often locks doors. When someone says, "I'll never make it," or "this problem is too big," those words build mental and spiritual barriers that keep them trapped. They limit the imagination, weaken the will, and create an atmosphere of defeat. On the other hand, faith-filled words unlock doors of opportunity and possibility. Saying, "God will make a way," or "I know this challenge will turn into a testimony," not only strengthens the speaker's heart, but also invites God's intervention. Faith words create expectation, and expectation draws forth miracles. It is important to remember that faith and fear are both contagious. When you speak in fear, those around you begin to adopt the same doubt and negativity. But when you speak in faith, you plant courage into the hearts of others. Your declaration becomes a spark that ignites their own hope. That is why leaders, parents, and friends must be mindful of their words. Fear drains, but faith uplifts. Fear paralyzes, but faith mobilizes. A short, powerful example can be drawn from the story of two employees in a struggling company. Both faced the possibility of losing their jobs. The first one constantly said, "This company is going under, and I'll never find another job. Everything is against me." His words not only deepened his own fear, but also spread anxiety to those around him. The second, though aware of the same risk, chose to say, "I don't know how this will turn out, but I trust that God will open a better door for me." If this chapter closes, another one will begin with greater opportunities. His words, rooted in faith, gave him peace and even encouraged his colleagues to remain hopeful. Months later, the company downsized, and while the first employee sank into despair, the second found a new job that was better than the one he had lost. His faith-filled words had prepared his heart to see possibility instead of paralysis. Speaking with faith and not fear is choosing to be a witness of God's power rather than a victim of circumstances. It is deciding that your tongue will not echo your doubt, but declare your trust. When your words carry faith, you invite heaven to move, and you shape a destiny that fear can never steal. To speak with consistency is to recognize that words are like seeds, and seeds need time to grow before the harvest comes. A farmer who sows good seed today but pulls it up tomorrow in frustration will never see a crop. In the same way, when we use our words to declare blessing, faith, and life one moment, but then contradict those with negativity, doubt, or curses the next, we sabotage the very harvest we are hoping for. Consistency in speech means remaining steady, holding fast to words of truth, even when circumstances seem to challenge them, and refusing to let frustration or impatience cause us to undo the work of faith we have already planted. Inconsistency in speech is like giving mixed instructions to your future. Imagine telling your children that you believe in them one day, and the next day telling them they will never amount to anything. Those contradictory words create confusion, instability, and insecurity. The same happens when we speak blessing over our lives in prayer, but then cancel it out by complaining, doubting, or cursing our situation in conversation. Consistent speech builds trust in ourselves, in those who hear us, and most importantly, in our relationship with God. It shows that we truly believe in what we are declaring, and that belief opens the door for results. Consistency also requires patience. Just as a seed does not produce fruit overnight, the words you plant will take time to show their harvest. Many people give up too soon. They start strong, declaring God's promises, but when challenges arise, they switch their confession to defeat. That inconsistency delays, or even destroys the blessing that was on its way. But when you keep speaking life steadily, day after day, you are watering the seed, nurturing the ground, and allowing God's timing to bring the increase. A short example makes this clear. Picture someone praying for financial provision. On Sunday, they boldly declare, God is my provider. He will meet all my needs. But on Monday, when bills arrive, they say, I'll never get out of this debt. Nothing ever works out for me. On Tuesday, they try again. The Lord will make a way. But by Wednesday, they repeat, I'll probably lose everything. This back and forth speech is like planting a seed and digging it up again. The result is no growth, no harvest, only frustration. Now imagine the same person choosing consistency. No matter what the bills look like, they say every day, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He will supply all my needs according to his riches in glory. Even if circumstances look dark, their steady words of faith keep the seed in the ground, watered by trust. In time, provision comes and the harvest appears because they refuse to speak in contradiction. Speaking with consistency is not about ignoring reality. It is about refusing to let reality dictate your confession. It is standing firm day after day with words that align with God's truth until the fruit appears. Consistent words bring consistent results, and a divided tongue can never produce a united harvest. To speak with eternity in mind is to realize that words are not bound by the moment in which they are spoken. They ripple outward, carry an influence long after the sound has faded. Some words may be forgotten quickly, but others linger for years, shaping lives, decisions, and even generations. When we understand this, we begin to treat our speech not as casual chatter, but as eternal investments. Each word either builds a bridge toward God or becomes a stumbling block that pushes someone away from Him. Speaking with eternity in mind means choosing to let your words carry weight that glorifies God and points people toward truth, hope, and salvation. Life is full of temporary pressures that tempt us to speak hastily. Anger, frustration, fear, or pride. But words spoken in haste can leave scars that last far longer than the moment that provoked them. By contrast, when you filter your speech through the lens of eternity, you begin to ask yourself questions like, if I say this, will it strengthen faith or weaken it? Will it echo heaven's truth or earth's bitterness? Will it matter in the light of forever? Those questions help guide us away from careless words and toward words that bear fruit that lasts. This eternal perspective also transforms how we encourage others. A word of kindness today might seem small, but in the span of eternity, it can be the spark that ignites someone's faith journey. A testimony you share might seem like just a story, but to the person listening, it could be the very message that draws them closer to God. The Bible reminds us that we will give an account for every idle word. That means no word is truly wasted. Each one matters, and each one will either stand as evidence of a life that glorified God or a life that squandered opportunities to point people toward Him. Consider this simple yet powerful example. Imagine a grandfather speaking to his young grandson. If he constantly says, "You're a troublemaker, you'll never amount to much," those words can become a prophecy of limitation that echoes in the boy's mind into adulthood. Even after the grandfather is gone, the destructive echo of those words may live on, influencing choices and self-perception. But imagine instead the grandfather consistently saying, "God has placed greatness in you. You are loved. You are chosen. And you will do mighty things." Those words do not just encourage in the moment. They plant seeds of identity and faith that can bear fruit for decades. Long after the grandfather's voice is silenced, his words continue to inspire, guide, and shape the boy into a man who believes in God's plan for his life. Speaking with eternity in mind is about seeing beyond the now and understanding the forever. Every word can either dim someone's hope or brighten their path. When your speech carries eternal weight, it becomes part of God's story, unfolding in the lives of others. Choose words that will echo in heaven, Words that will bear fruit not only today, but also for generations to come. My friends, if you want your life to bear fruit, your lips must bear fruit. If you want your family to walk in blessing, your words must carry blessing. If you want your future to shine, your mouth must speak light. So let us pray today. Father, sanctify my lips. Let my words carry your truth, your power, and your life. May every word I speak bear good fruit, fruit that blesses my home, fruit that strengthens my community, fruit that glorifies your holy name. And when you leave this place, remember this: words are not wasted. They either produce weeds or they produce harvest. So speak carefully, speak boldly, and speak in alignment with heaven. Then you will watch as every word you release becomes a seed of victory, healing, and breakthrough. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Life will always bring you two invitations. One is wrapped in fear, cold, heavy, whispering, "What if it all goes wrong?" The other is clothed in hope, warm, glowing, declaring, "What if it all goes right?" Let me paint a picture for you right now, because whether you realize it or not, there's a battle raging inside of you. Two voices are wrestling for control of your mind, your mood, and your momentum. One voice whispers, "You can't make it." The other shouts, "You were made for this." One drains your energy, the other fuels your purpose. One voice is called fear, the other is called hope. These two forces don't visit you once in a lifetime, they live with you every single day. When you wake up in the morning, they're right there beside your bed. Fear says, "Don't even try." Hope says, "Get up, today could be the day." When you look at your bank account, fear says, "You're not going to make it." Hope says, "This is just the seed before the harvest." When you step into a new opportunity, fear says, "You're not ready." Hope says, "God wouldn't open the door if you weren't." See, fear and hope are like two dogs fighting inside you, and the one that wins is the one you feed. Feed your fear with doubt, and it will grow stronger. Feed your hope with faith, and it will roar like a lion. You don't conquer fear by ignoring it. You conquer fear by choosing to believe something bigger than it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds good, but you don't know what I'm facing. You're right, I don't know your exact situation, but I do know this: every great person who's ever done something worth remembering had to face the collision of hope and fear. David faced it when he saw Goliath. Moses faced it when he stood before Pharaoh. Esther faced it when she risked her life before the king. They all felt fear, but they refused to let fear make the final decision. Fear is loud. Fear will tell you that you're too late, too broken, too small. It will play reruns of your worst moments, hoping you'll forget who you are. But hope doesn't shout. Hope whispers in the chaos. Hope says, "You are still standing. You are still breathing. That means your purpose is still alive." Fear is like a shadow. It looks big. It stretches long, but it has no real substance. The moment you turn toward the light, the shadow starts to shrink. That's what hope does. It turns you toward the light. It doesn't erase the darkness, but it reminds you that darkness doesn't last forever. Let me tell you something. Powerful fear reacts to what it sees, but hope responds to what it believes. Fear sees the facts. Hope sees the future. Fear focuses on the obstacle. Hope focuses on the outcome. And when those two collide, something sacred happens. You get to choose which one becomes your master. The collision of hope and fear is the moment where character is born. That's where destinies are decided, because courage doesn't mean you feel no fear. It means you've chosen not to surrender to it. The praise, inch of fear doesn't mean the absence of hope. It just means you've got a chance to prove that your hope is real. So every time life shakes you, remember this: both hope and fear are waiting to see which one you'll serve. Fear wants to keep you stuck, replaying what went wrong. Hope wants to push you forward, imagining what could go right. Fear wants to silence you, Hope wants to give you a new song. Fear says you'll never make it. Hope says you already made it through worse. Inside every heart, there's a collision, a spiritual tug of war between despair and destiny. You can't stop the collision, but you can decide the outcome. Because when fear rises, hope doesn't run, it rises higher. And the moment you believe that, the balance begins to shift inside you. The storm doesn't stop, but suddenly you realize you've got an anchor. And that anchor is called hope. Because the truth is, life will always give you a choice. Every sunrise, every setback, every opportunity at all comes down to one question: what voice will you believe? You see, this isn't about circumstances, it's about conviction. It's not about what's happening around you, it's about what's happening in you. You can't control the wind, but you can set your sail. You can't choose the storm, but you can choose your stance. The choice between hope and fear isn't a one-time decision, it's a daily declaration. Fear doesn't knock once it keeps coming back, disguised as logic, dressed in reason, wrapped in what-ifs. But hope doesn't need a disguise. Hope walks in the room uninvited and still changes the atmosphere. Hope doesn't beg for permission to exist, it declares its place in your heart. Now hear me, the direction of your destiny depends on which one you entertain. You can't walk with both. One will always silence the other. If you give fear a seat at your table, it will eat your peace, drink your joy, and still tell you you're not enough. But if you make room for hope, it will multiply what's left, remind you of what's possible, and tell you you still have more in you. Let me make it plain. Fear is persuasive, but hope is powerful. Fear can only speak about the past. It will show you the failures, the rejections, the disappointments, and say, see, you've been here before. But hope speaks about the future. It takes those same scars and says, you survived that. You can handle this. That's why you can't wait for the feeling to change before you make the choice. You've got to choose before you feel ready. You've got to open your mouth and speak hope even when your voice shakes. Because sometimes the loudest declaration you'll ever make isn't to the world, it's to yourself. I will not live in fear. I will not surrender my joy. I will not let doubt write my story. Every day, life asks you to cast a vote not at the ballot box, but in your spirit. Will you vote for hope or for fear? When you choose fear, you shrink. When you choose hope, you stretch. When you choose fear, you hide. When you choose hope, you rise. And hear me, whichever one you choose doesn't just affect you. It affects your family, your children, your future. Because when you walk in hope, you give others permission to believe again. See, fear is contagious, but so is hope. Fear spreads like wildfire, but hope spreads like sunrise, slow, steady, unstoppable. You can walk into a room full of despair, open your mouth, and shift the whole atmosphere when hope lives inside you. Some of you have been letting fear drive your car for too long. Fear's been in the driver's seat and you've been a passenger in your own purpose. But I came to tell you it's time to pull over, throw fear out, and let hope take the wheel. Because the direction of your life changes the moment your choice changes. When you choose hope, the same situation looks different. The mountain doesn't shrink, but your faith grows. The problem doesn't vanish, but your peace deepens. The enemy doesn't disappear, but your courage starts to roar. Because hope doesn't need everything to change, it just needs you to decide. So right here, right now, in the middle of whatever you're facing, fear may be screaming, but hope is still speaking. And the voice you choose to follow will determine the life you live. Because when you decide to listen to the voice of hope, something shifts inside you. You stop staring at the storm and start searching for the sun behind the clouds. You stop counting your problems and start remembering your promises. See, hope doesn't pretend the thunder isn't real. It just knows that lightning never lasts forever. Hope has a way of seeing beyond the storm. You've got to understand this: storms don't mean you're off course. Sometimes they mean you're on the right one. The presence of trouble isn't the absence of purpose. The rain may fall, the wind may howl, but hope keeps your eyes fixed on what's ahead, not what's around. When life feels like it's falling apart, hope reminds you that maybe, just maybe, it's actually falling into place. Some of you have been staring at the storm so long that you've forgotten there's still a sky. You've been watching the waves crash and the winds rage, and fear keeps telling you it's over. But hope leans in and whispers, lift your eyes. Because hope doesn't look down. Hope looks forward. It doesn't deny the darkness, but it believes in the dawn. Let me tell you something. The storm was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to develop you. It's in the storm where strength is born. It's in the rain where roots go deep. You can't see growth when the sky is clear because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in conflict. That's why hope is so powerful. It's not scared of the storm. It stands in the rain with its head lifted high, saying, I may be drenched, but am not defeated. You see, fear focuses on what's shaking, but hope focuses on what's stable. Hope grabs hold of something unshakable, something eternal, something that doesn't change when everything else does. It says, the wind can blow, but my foundation won't move. That's what gives you peace when it doesn't make sense to have peace. That's what keeps you calm when the storm is raging, because you know storms don't last, but strength does. Hope is like an anchor. You might be tossed around, but you won't be taken under. You might bend, but you won't break. You might cry, but you won't quit. Hope holds you steady when fear tries to pull you under. It doesn't stop the storm from coming, but it keeps the storm from controlling you. When you carry hope, you stop asking, why me? And start saying, what's next? You stop begging for the storm to end and start believing for what it's about to produce, because every storm has an assignment to show you something about your strength, to reveal something about your purpose, to prove something about your God. And don't miss, this hope is not loud, but it's persistent. It doesn't always shout, but it always stands. It doesn't always win quickly, but it always wins eventually. You might be standing in the middle of chaos, wondering how it's going to work out, and hope just leans in and says, keep standing, you'll see. Hope doesn't just look at what is, it looks at what can be. It sees the rainbow before the rain stops. It hears the victory song before the battle ends. It feels the breakthrough before the walls fall. And that's why you can't let the storm make you forget the sun. Because even when you can't see it, it's still shining. So when the wind rises and the clouds gather, don't lose your focus. Fear looks at the storm, but hope keeps its eyes on the horizon. Because while hope keeps its eyes on the horizon, fear keeps its hands on the bars. Fear is a prison guard, my friends. It doesn't need chains to hold you. It just needs your agreement. It doesn't have to lock a door. It only has to convince you the door won't open. Fear builds invisible walls in your mind, and then it dares you to believe they are real. And the tragedy is too many people spend their whole lives living in cages that were never locked. Fear is crafty, won't always come shouting. Sometimes it comes whispering. It whispers, stay where it's safe. Don't dream too big. Don't try again. D, you start living like what was is all there'll ever be. That's what fear does. It turns potential into paralysis. It doesn't destroy your dream. It just delays it until you forget it was ever possible. And the longer you sit behind those bars, the more comfortable they start to feel. You start calling them normal. You start calling them reality. You start calling them just the way things are. But deep down, something inside you still aches for more. That's hope trying to rattle the cage. That's hope saying there's more than this. You can't break out of fear's prison with your feelings. You break out with your faith. Feelings will tell you it's too dangerous, too late, too hard. But faith says, if God called me to it, I can walk through it. Fear keeps you focused on what could go wrong. Faith keeps you focused on who's still in control. The key to escaping fear isn't waiting for it to disappear. It's moving while it's still there. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that fear won't make the choice. Some of you have been pacing the same cells, staring at the same walls, rehearsing the same excuses. You've been telling yourself, when I'm not scared, it'll move. But you don't wait for fear to leave. You take a step and let fear watch you go. Because the moment you move, the door starts to swing open. Fear's greatest weapon is not pain, it's persuasion. It talks you out of your purpose before you ever begin to pursue it. But the moment you stop listening, it loses its power, because fear cannot imprison a mind that's made up. When your mind says, I'm going anyway, fear has to back up. And that's when freedom starts, not when fear disappears, but when you decide you're done being its prisoner. When you choose to step out, even trembling, even unsure, even afraid, that's when you realize the door was never locked at all. Because once you take that first trembling step out of fear's cage, you realize something powerful. You were never walking alone. There was something greater, stronger, deeper, carrying you all along. That's where hope draws its strength. Hope doesn't come from how much you can control it, comes from how much you can trust. Because real hope is not built on circumstances, it's built on faith. Faith is the fuel that keeps hope burning when everything else says quit. Faith doesn't wait for evidence. Faith is the evidence. It doesn't say, show me first. It says, I'll step first. Faith is that quiet confidence that says, I don't see it yet, but I know it's coming. And when faith and hope link arms, fear doesn't stand a chance. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith thrives in it too, just for different reasons. Fear sees uncertainty and panics. Faith sees uncertainty and prepares. Fear says, what if? Faith says, even if. Fear asks, how? Faith says, who? See, fear is obsessed with details, but faith is obsessed with direction. You may not know the details, but when your direction is set on trust, you'll always end up where you're meant to be. Hope doesn't deny reality, it just stands on a greater reality. It says, yes, the storm is real, but so is the Savior. Yes, the pain is real, but so is the promise. Yes, I'm weak, but he is strong. Hope anchored in faith doesn't crumble under pressure. It grows stronger in it. Because faith doesn't need perfect conditions to work. It just needs a willing heart to believe. Let me tell you, there's a reason faith and hope always walk together. Hope gives you vision. Faith gives you motion. Hope shows you what's possible. Faith says, let's go get it. Hope paints the picture, faith picks up the brush. Hope is the blueprint faith starts building. Without faith, hope stays a dream. Without hope, faith loses direction. But together, together they become unstoppable. And here's the secret: faith doesn't mean you always feel confident. It just means you move forward even when you're not. You can have shaking hands and still have steady faith. You can have trembling knees and still take the next step. Because faith isn't built on feelings, it's built on trust in something that doesn't shake when the world does. When life says it's over, faith says not yet. When fear says you're finished, faith says I've only just begun. When the road disappears, faith says I'll walk on water if I have to. That's the kind of faith that feeds hope, the kind that refuses to let fear write the story. And you've got to understand, faith is not fragile. It's forged in fire. It grows in the dark. You don't know how strong your faith really is until you've had to use it. It's one thing to talk about trust when the skies are clear. It's another to live it when the clouds roll in. But that's where faith shines brightest. That's when hope stands tallest. Because faith says, I may not know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. And when you start living like that, fear starts losing ground. It can't stand where faith stands. It can't breathe where hope lives. So when life shakes you, don't reach for control, reach for faith. Because faith doesn't remove the storm, it reminds you who commands it. And when you remember who commands the storm, that's when you realize something deep down in your spirit: hope always wins. Victory doesn't belong to the fearless, it belongs to the hopeful. The people who change the world, the people who rise from the ashes, the people who refuse to stay down, they all have one thing in common. They chose to believe when everything around them said not to. You see, fear can make a lot of noise, but hope carries authority. Fear yells, but hope declares. Fear reacts, but hope responds. Fear says, you're done. Hope says, spirit, when everything else is trying to break it. Hope says, I've cried, but I'm still standing. Hope says, I've lost, but I haven't quit. Hope says, I've been through the fire, but I came out refined. Because hope has a memory. It remembers every time you made it through what you thought would break you. And it uses that memory to push you forward. History is full of people who weren't the smartest, the richest, or the most powerful, but they were hopeful. They looked at walls and saw doors. They faced defeat and saw destiny. They were ordinary people who dared to believe that what was in front of them wasn't final. And that's what makes hope stronger than fear, because fear is temporary, but hope is eternal. Fear expires when truth enters the room. Hope lives wherever truth reigns. Fear makes you look at what you lost. Hope reminds you what's left. Fear tells you to sit down. Hope tells you to stand up. Fear says it's too late. Hope says it's right on time. When you walk in hope, you carry a power that no darkness can contain. It's the same power that turns graves into gardens, pain into purpose, tears into testimony. And when you've tasted that kind of hope, you stop living like a victim and start walking like a victor. Hope doesn't just give you strength, it gives you sight. It lets you see beyond your current situation into the promise waiting on the other side. When others see a dead end, hope sees a detour. When others see a breakdown, hope sees a breakthrough. When others see defeat, hope sees development. Because victory doesn't come from avoiding the fight, it comes from outlasting the fear. And don't get it twisted. Hope doesn't always shout hallelujahs. Sometimes hope just whispers, keep going. Sometimes hope shows up in the quiet, in the breath you take after crying all night, in the courage it takes to try one more time, in the decision to wake up and face the day. That's victory. That's strength. That's hope in motion. Because every time you choose to hope instead of fear, you win a battle the enemy thought you'd lose. You might not see fireworks. You might not hear applause, but heaven celebrates every time you choose hope over fear. That's where victory begins, not when everything is fixed, but when your faith says, I'm not quitting. Because at the end of the day, fear bows to hope, and hope bows to the one who never fails.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let me begin with a question that echoes in every human heart. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? Because no matter how much money you make, how many people know your name, or how much success you stack up, if you don't answer that question, you will spend your days chasing shadows and calling it substance. Life is not simply about existence. It's not about clocking in and clocking out, paying bills, and trying to survive until the weekend. The real meaning of life is not found in what you own, what you drive, or even in the applause of people. Those things are temporary. They fade, they rust, and they die. But what we're after is a meaning that lasts, a purpose that stands the test of time and eternity. Life's meaning is not something you manufacture out of thin air. It is something you uncover because you were designed with intention. A painting doesn't decide why it exists. Its meaning is tied to the vision of the artist who created it. In the same way, we don't define our own lasting purpose. We discover it by aligning with the one who placed us here. The world often tells us to find yourself, to chase after personal dreams, or create our own truth. But the truth is, meaning is not invented, because what we invent is limited by our own imagination. Real purpose is revealed when we look to the designer who already had a plan in mind before we even took our first breath. Think of it this way: when you buy a microwave, you don't sit it on the counter and ask it, what do you want to be? It doesn't get to decide its purpose. You open the manual, and the creator tells you what it was built for. To use it in any other way would be frustrating and ineffective. Likewise, when people try to create their own meaning apart from their creator, they often end up misusing their lives. running after things that never satisfy, chasing goals that don't last, and wondering why they still feel empty inside. The truth is, purpose that isn't rooted in the one who designed you will always leave you unfulfilled. A simple yet powerful example of this can be seen in the story of a young man who spent years studying to become a lawyer because he believed success and wealth would bring him fulfillment. He achieved his dream job, bought a beautiful house, and had everything people told him would make him happy. Yet, deep down, he felt a gnawing emptiness. It wasn't until he began volunteering at a local shelter, mentoring kids, and reconnecting with his faith, that he realized his true purpose wasn't in chasing titles, but in using his gifts to serve others. He didn't create that purpose. It had been inside him all along, placed there by his Creator. He simply had to uncover it. That is the essence of lasting meaning. You don't invent it, you discover it. And when you do, every choice, every day, and every breath starts to carry eternal weight. The search for lasting meaning often falls short when life is lived only for oneself, when everything revolves around personal comfort, success, or recognition. Meaning becomes fragile. The moment trials come, those self-centered foundations crumble. If your entire sense of worth is tied to how much money you earn or how many people admire you, then one economic downturn or one season of rejection can leave you feeling like life has lost all value. That is why true meaning must be connected to something greater than yourself, something that outlives you, something eternal, something that isn't shaken when the storms of life arrive. When a person's purpose is rooted only in self, it's like building a house on sand. The structure may look beautiful for a while, but when the rain pours and the winds blow, it collapses because it has no anchor. But when you tie your life to something bigger, whether that's serving people, lifting up others, or living for God's kingdom, you discover a meaning that doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Your life becomes part of a larger story, and that bigger story sustains you when your own story feels hard. For example, consider a teacher who chose to work in an underfunded school. From the outside, it may look like a thankless job with little financial reward or recognition. Many of her colleagues questioned why she stayed year after year. But her sense of purpose wasn't tied to her paycheck or her own comfort. She believed she was called to shape young lives and plant seeds of hope in children who otherwise might not believe in themselves. Even when resources were scarce and challenges were overwhelming, her meaning didn't shrink because it was anchored in something larger than her personal gain. Years later, some of her students returned as adults to thank her, saying her influence helped them escape cycles of poverty and despair. Her meaning had endured because it wasn't self-centered. It was connected to something bigger, something that touched eternity. That's the kind of meaning that lasts. It's the kind of purpose that can carry you through disappointment, loss, or hardship. When your life is bigger than you, your meaning remains unshaken, and your story becomes part of a much greater legacy. Lasting meaning is never found in how much you can accumulate, but in how much of yourself you are willing to give. The culture around us often pushes the idea that success equals possession. More money, more influence, more recognition. Yet time and time again, we see people who have achieved those very things still struggling with emptiness. Why? Because the heart was not designed to be satisfied by what it can keep, but by what it can release. True joy is not in hoarding, but in pouring out, not in holding tightly, but in living generously. When you live only for yourself, your achievements die when you do. But when your life is invested in others, your impact outlives you. Giving is what transforms temporary actions into lasting legacies. It might be giving your time, your resources, your talents, or simply your love. But when you choose to pour into someone else, you step into a kind of meaning that cannot be erased. It is in giving that we mirror the greatest example of love and purpose ever shown to humanity, because giving is the very heartbeat of a life that lasts. Consider the story of a successful businessman who built his career from the ground up. He had everything: luxury cars, a mansion, and the admiration of his peers. Yet, as he reached the peak of his wealth, he confessed privately to feeling a hollow ache, a sense that something was missing. One day, he was invited to fund a small project for a local orphanage. At first, he gave reluctantly, but when he visited the children and saw their joy, something shifted inside him. He began not only donating money, but spending weekends at the orphanage, mentoring the kids and helping them dream bigger than their circumstances. Years later, he would say that those moments, not the business awards or the bank accounts, were what finally gave him peace and fulfillment. He discovered that meaning came not from what he had taken from the world, but from what he gave back. That is the secret of a meaningful life. Possessions fade, applause dies down, and wealth changes hands. But the lives you touch, the love you show, and the sacrifices you make remain long after you are gone. Giving is where meaning is planted, and giving is where meaning grows. Pain and trials often feel like interruptions to the life we hoped for. But in reality, they are not meaningless detours. They are purposeful tools used to shape us, strengthen us, and prepare us for assignments bigger than we could imagine. Struggles are not evidence that life has gone wrong. Many times they are evidence that life is working exactly as it should. Just as diamonds are formed under intense pressure and gold is purified in fire, our character, resilience, and faith are often revealed and refined in the moments that hurt the most. Without the struggle, there would be no strength. Without the refining fire, there would be no purity. It is easy to believe that trials take away from our purpose, but in truth, they uncover it. The very things we would choose to avoid often end up being the experiences that make us more compassionate, more courageous, and more equipped to make an impact. Pain has a way of teaching lessons that comfort never can. It strips away illusions, deepens perspective, and forces us to anchor ourselves to what truly lasts. When we embrace this truth, we begin to see that our suffering is not wasted. It is an investment in who we are becoming. Take the story of a young woman who dreamed of being a professional athlete. She trained relentlessly, giving everything to her sport. But just before her career was about to take off, a devastating injury shattered her hopes. For months she wrestled with despair, convinced that her life had lost its meaning. Yet, during her recovery, she began volunteering to coach children with disabilities who longed to play sports but lacked opportunities. What started as a way to pass the time became her new passion. She eventually created a foundation that provided adaptive sports programs across the country. Looking back, she admitted that losing her athletic career was painful, but without that trial, she would never have discovered the greater purpose she was called to live out. Her pain was the very doorway to her destiny. This is the truth about trials. They are not wasted moments. They are the chisels that carve us into who we were meant to be. When we trust that even our hardest seasons are working toward a greater plan, pain becomes more than suffering. It becomes preparation. If the meaning of your life ends at the grave, then your purpose is far too small. Everything we chase on this earth, wealth, fame, possessions, even accomplishments, has an expiration date. One day the bank account will belong to someone else. The applause will fade, and the trophies will gather dust. If your meaning is tied only to the temporary, then when death arrives, so does the end of your purpose. But lasting meaning must stretch beyond the cemetery. It must connect to something eternal, something that carries value, not just in this life, but in the life to come. Living only for today may bring temporary satisfaction, but it ultimately wastes forever. To live with eternity in mind is to discover life that truly matters. When people anchor their purpose to eternal truths, their lives ripple far beyond their years. Their legacy is not in what they possessed, but in what they invested into others and into God's kingdom. Meaning that points beyond the grave reshapes how you live today. It changes your priorities, your relationships, your decisions, and your values. You no longer measure life by temporary success, but by eternal impact. That's why those who live with eternity in view often seem to walk with greater peace and clarity. They know that even when this life ends, their purpose continues. A powerful example of this can be seen in the life of a woman who spent her years serving in a small, unnoticed community. She wasn't wealthy, and she never held a prestigious title. What she did have was an unshakable commitment to teaching children about faith, hope, and love. Week after week, she gathered kids in her modest living room, telling them stories, praying with them, and encouraging them to dream bigger than their circumstances. When she passed away, Many thought her influence had ended. But years later, some of those same children became teachers, leaders, and even pastors themselves, all carrying forward the seed she planted. Her life did not end at the grave because her meaning was rooted in something eternal. That is the kind of purpose worth living for. The kind that doesn't just last for a lifetime, but stretches into forever. When you anchor your life to eternity, death is not the end of your story. It is only the doorway into the lasting impact of a life well lived. Life's meaning is not hidden in the shallow waters of success or comfort. It is discovered when you dive deep into faith, into service, into love, into the eternal plan of the one who made you. So stop chasing temporary trophies. Stop trying to fill eternal hunger with earthly snacks. Anchor your life to what cannot be shaken, and you will find a meaning that not only lasts, but a meaning that transforms every day you live. So, I challenge you today, don't just exist. Don't just breathe. Live a life that counts, a life that matters, a life that lasts. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let me start by asking you a question. What are you chasing? Because whether you realize it or not, your focus determines your future. Every one of us has eyes fixed on something. Some are fixed on success, some on money, some on recognition, some on relationships. But here's the truth. Most of what we chase fades, fails, or falls apart. And that's why today, I want to challenge you with this word. Fix your eyes on what will last forever. We live in a world that thrives on the temporary. The trends change overnight, possessions depreciate, and even people disappoint. What looks shiny today can rust tomorrow. But eternity never loses its value. When you anchor your focus on eternal things, things that outlast this world, you start living with purpose, with peace, and with power. One of the greatest struggles we face in life is learning how to keep our focus on what truly matters. The truth is that distractions are everywhere, pulling at us from every direction, and most of them look good on the surface. Success, recognition, possessions, career goals, or even relationships. All of these are things we can spend our whole lives chasing. But if we're honest, much of what consumes our time and energy today won't hold any weight in the long run. The applause of people fades quickly, money loses its value, and achievements that seem so important today are often forgotten tomorrow. That's why we must guard our hearts against being distracted by what won't last. The real test is to ask ourselves a simple but powerful question. Will this matter 100 years from now? Will this count in eternity? The danger of living for temporary things is that they give us a false sense of fulfillment. When we achieve them, there's a burst of excitement, but the satisfaction doesn't last. It's like chasing a shadow. You may think you've caught it, but the moment you open your hand, you realize there's nothing there. This constant cycle of striving leaves us tired, restless, and still searching for meaning. Distractions are subtle, They don't always look like bad things. In fact, many of them can be good in their right place. But the moment they become the ultimate thing, the center of our focus, they begin to rob us of the greater purpose we were meant to live for. Think of it like driving a car. If your eyes are glued to the billboards on the side of the road, instead of on where you're going, you're bound to crash. The same is true in life. When your eyes are fixed on things that don't matter in eternity, you run the risk of losing direction, wasting time, and living a life that feels full but ends up empty. We all only get one life, and it's too short to be spent running after things that don't carry eternal weight. An excellent example of this can be seen in the story of a young man who spent years working tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder. He sacrificed time with family, neglected his health, and even set aside his faith just so he could secure promotions, recognition, and a bigger paycheck. To everyone else, he looked successful, admired, and unstoppable. But years later, when he finally reached the top, he found himself empty, disconnected, and spiritually dry. The applause had faded, the achievements felt hollow, and the relationships he neglected were no longer there to support him. What he thought would bring fulfillment ended up leaving him with regret. It wasn't that his career was wrong, but he let the pursuit of it distract him from what truly mattered. Had he balanced his ambition with eternal values, loving people, nurturing his faith, and investing in relationships, he could have experienced real fulfillment alongside success. This is why we must constantly refocus our lives. Every distraction, no matter how appealing, must be measured by whether or not it will last. When we live with eternity in mind, we begin to make different choices. We learn to spend less time obsessing over things that won't last and more time building things that will. Joy, faith, love, kindness, and service. These are things that echo forever. If we don't intentionally guard our hearts, distractions will creep in and steal our focus without us even noticing. But when we fix our eyes on what is eternal, we find clarity, peace, and purpose that no temporary success can ever provide. So don't be deceived by the glitter of things that won't last. They may shine for a moment, but they won't carry you into eternity. Choose instead to keep your focus on what endures. When you live this way, you'll never look back with regret, because you'll know you invested in what matters most. To live a life of meaning and impact, we must learn to invest in what is eternal. Everything we have, our time, our talents, our resources, our energy, are like seeds. And just as with farming, the harvest we reap depends on where and how we plant those seeds. If we pour all of our energy into things that only satisfy the moment, then what we receive will also be temporary. The rewards might look impressive for a while, but eventually they fade. Wealth can be lost, status can be stripped, and even the greatest human achievements can be forgotten with time. But when we choose to plant our lives in eternal soil, through faith, love, service, and advancing God's purposes, we create a legacy that nothing and no one can erase. Eternal investments are never wasted because their returns outlast this world. One of the most profound truths about investing in eternal things is that it requires a shift in perspective. The world teaches us to store up possessions, chase recognition, and build comfort. But eternity teaches us that life is not measured by what we keep, but by what we give away. It's not about how much we accumulate for ourselves, but how much we invest in others and in the purposes that will never fade. This is why love, kindness, sacrifice, and faithfulness are considered eternal treasures. They ripple beyond our lifetime, touching hearts, shaping futures, and echoing into eternity. To invest in the eternal is not about ignoring the present or neglecting responsibilities, but about reordering our priorities. It means asking ourselves hard questions. Am I spending my time only on what benefits me now? Or am I building something that will outlast me? Am I using my resources just for personal comfort? Or am I sowing them into the lives of others, into causes that matter, into things that bring glory beyond this life? When we look at our lives this way, every decision becomes more significant because each one carries the potential to reach into forever. A simple but powerful example of this truth can be seen in the story of a woman named Sarah. She wasn't wealthy, influential, or widely known. She lived a quiet life, raising her children and working an ordinary job. But Sarah made a choice to invest her life in eternal soil. Instead of chasing recognition or material gain, she spent her evenings mentoring troubled teenagers in her community. She offered them meals, encouragement, and wisdom. Some nights she gave her last bit of money to help them buy books for school or to cover a bus ticket to an interview. She prayed with them, listened to their struggles, and never stopped believing in them. Years passed, and Sarah's health declined. But at her funeral, hundreds of young men and women stood up to testify about how her love, her time, and her faith had changed their lives. Many of them had become leaders, parents, teachers, and servants in their own communities because Sarah had invested in them. She may not have been rich by worldly standards, but her eternal portfolio was overflowing. The seeds she planted in love and service bore fruit that multiplied long after her earthly life ended. That is what it means to invest in the eternal. You may never see the full harvest in your lifetime, but eternity will reveal the impact of every seed you sow. The acts of kindness that seem small, the sacrifices nobody notices, the faith you live out quietly. All of these become eternal treasures, stored up where nothing can destroy them. When you choose to invest in what lasts forever, you ensure that your life was not just lived, but that it counted. Life is full of storms, and no one is immune to them. There will always be moments when disappointment strikes, when the unexpected happens, and when challenges weigh us down to the point that it feels almost impossible to move forward. In those moments, the natural reaction is to fix our eyes on the problem itself. We stare at the chaos, the loss, or the heartbreak, and the more we focus on it, the bigger it seems. But when all our attention is locked onto the storm, we begin to sink under the weight of fear, doubt, and despair. This is why it is so crucial to keep our vision heavenward. When we lift our gaze above the storm, we remind ourselves that there is a greater reality beyond what we can see, and that this moment, no matter how painful, is not the entire story of our lives. Fixing your vision heavenward does not mean ignoring the problems you face or pretending they don't exist. Rather, it is about gaining perspective. A storm may rage for a while, but storms are temporary, they pass. Heaven, on the other hand, is permanent, unshakable, and eternal. When you keep your eyes lifted, you anchor yourself in something greater than the temporary trial. That perspective brings hope, strength, and courage to endure, because you realize you are not defined by what you are going through. You are defined by where you are headed. The truth is that we cannot always control what comes against us, but we can control where we fix our eyes. If our focus is only on the pain, then pain will dominate our spirit. If our focus is on loss, then loss will steal our hope. But if our focus is on the eternal, we gain the ability to stand even when life shakes us. We realize that setbacks can be setups, and trials can become testimonies when seen through the lens of eternity. A powerful example of this can be seen in the life of a man who lost his business, his health, and nearly all his hope. He had spent decades building a company only to watch it crumble overnight due to circumstances beyond his control. At the same time, a sudden illness left him weak and unable to do the things he once loved. Friends began to distance themselves, and he found himself battling loneliness along with financial pressure. For months, he stared at the ruins of his life, feeling swallowed by defeat. But one day, he made a simple yet profound shift. Instead of staring at what he had lost, he began to focus on what could never be taken from him: his faith, his eternal hope, and his ability to still make a difference in small ways. He started mentoring young men in his neighborhood, teaching them lessons about perseverance and integrity. He volunteered at a local shelter, offering encouragement to those facing struggles even greater than his own. Over time, his health stabilized, and though his business was gone, he discovered a joy he had never known before. By keeping his eyes heavenward, he realized his story wasn't over. It had only taken a new direction. This is what happens when you lift your vision above the storm. You stop sinking and start standing. You no longer see yourself as a victim of circumstances, but as someone anchored in a reality that storms cannot shake. The difficulties don't disappear, but their power to destroy your spirit does. Every trial becomes temporary when compared to eternity, and every pain becomes purposeful when viewed through heaven's lens. Keeping your vision heavenward means reminding yourself daily that this moment is not the whole story and that the best chapters of your life are not written by the storm, but by the one who is greater than the storm. One of the most powerful truths we can embrace is that eternity is not some distant idea disconnected from our daily lives. It is the reality that should shape how we live every single day. The way we think, the decisions we make, and the priorities we choose reveal whether we are living for temporary gratification or for something that will last forever. Many people live as though this life is all there is, pouring their energy into chasing success, comfort, or recognition. But those pursuits alone never satisfy. When eternity becomes our lens, everything changes. We no longer make choices based on what feels good in the moment, but on what will matter in the long run. Living with eternity in mind reshapes how we deal with relationships. Instead of holding grudges or letting pride drive us, we become quicker to forgive because we realize grudges don't last, but love does. Eternity reminds us that the people in our lives are more valuable than the arguments that divide us. It also changes how we approach opportunities. Instead of asking only, "What will this do for me now?" we start asking, "What impact will this have beyond me?" That shift in perspective frees us from the pressure to live for applause or temporary gains and empowers us to live with purpose, knowing that every small act of faithfulness has lasting significance. The truth is that living with eternity in mind requires courage. It is often easier to compromise for quick results, to take the shortcut rather than the long path, or to choose temporary pleasure over lasting fulfillment. But when eternity shapes your decisions, you realize that what feels costly now is nothing compared to the reward that lies ahead. It changes how you use your time, because suddenly each day is not something to waste, but something to steward. It changes how you use your resources, because instead of spending everything on yourself, you see opportunities to invest in people, in service, and in causes that carry eternal value. And it changes how you view difficulties, because even trials look different when you know they are producing something in you that outlasts the pain. A beautiful example of this can be seen in the life of a young student named Daniel. He was brilliant, talented, and had a promising future ahead of him. At school, many of his peers compromised their integrity to gain quick success, cheating on exams, bending rules, and cutting corners to get ahead. The pressure to join them was enormous because it seemed like the only way to succeed. But Daniel chose to let eternity shape his decisions. He refused to compromise his integrity, even when it meant facing ridicule and slower progress. Instead, he studied diligently, remained honest, and treated others with respect. In the short term, it looked like he was behind while others raced ahead. But over time, something remarkable happened. His character earned him the trust of his teachers, his peers, and eventually the leaders in his community. Years later, while many of those who took shortcuts had stumbled, Daniel's reputation and faithfulness opened doors for him that no temporary compromise could have secured. His life became a testimony of how integrity, faith, and eternal values always outlast temporary wins. This is the power of letting eternity shape your daily choices. It might not make you the most popular in the moment. It might not always feel easy, and it might even cost you something now. But in the end, you gain far more than you lose. Every act of honesty, every choice of love, every sacrifice for the sake of something greater builds a foundation that lasts forever. Life is short, but eternity is long. And when you live with eternity in mind, your daily choices become investments in something that no storm, no failure, and no time can ever take away. What you consistently focus on will eventually shape the person you become. The human heart and mind are like soil, and whatever you feed them with, whatever you fix your gaze upon, is the seed that will grow in your life. If you spend your days staring at negativity, failures, and fleeting pleasures, then your life will naturally begin to reflect those things. If, however, you focus on what is eternal, pure, and purposeful, you will grow into someone strong, steady, and unshakable. Your eyes determine your direction, and your direction determines your destiny. This is why the things you allow to capture your attention are not harmless. They are forming your character and molding your future. Every day we are surrounded by countless things competing for our focus. Social media, entertainment, material possessions, worries, and even people's opinions are constantly shouting for our attention. If we let our eyes remain fixed on these temporary things, they begin to consume our thoughts and influence our decisions. Soon we find ourselves chasing after what doesn't satisfy, comparing ourselves to others, or living in constant worry. The outcome is that we start becoming shaped by what we look at, whether or not we realize it. A person who constantly stares at fear will become fearful. A person who constantly stares at failure will begin to live in defeat. A person who constantly stares at the shallow pleasures of life will find themselves shallow in character. The eyes are powerful because they are the gateway to the heart, and the heart determines the course of life. On the other hand, when you fix your eyes on what lasts forever, on faith, on truth, on hope, on values that cannot fade, you grow stronger every day. You may still face storms, but your perspective is different. Your gaze is not glued to the problems in front of you, but lifted towards something greater, something eternal. This gives you clarity and focus, and it fuels your faith to keep moving forward, even when the path is difficult. By directing your eyes to what is eternal, you are training your heart to follow the right path. And over time, you become a person of stability, character, and resilience. Consider the story of an athlete preparing for a marathon. Every day, he has a choice. He can fix his eyes on distractions like comfort, laziness, or unhealthy habits, or he can fix his eyes on the goal of finishing the race strong. The more he focuses on short-term comfort, the weaker his body becomes and the less prepared he is for the race. But if he chooses to keep his eyes on the prize, every choice he makes reflects that focus. He wakes up early to train, eats food that fuels his body, and pushes through the pain of practice because his eyes are set on something bigger than the moment. By the time the day of the marathon arrives, he is not only ready, but he has also become stronger and more disciplined because of where he fixed his eyes. His body and his character have been shaped by his focus. Life works in the same way. Whatever you look at, you move toward. Your focus is like a magnet pulling you in its direction. If your eyes are always fixed on what is temporary, you'll waste your energy chasing things that disappear. But if your eyes are fixed on what is eternal, your faith grows, your purpose deepens, and your life becomes a testimony of stability in a world that is constantly shifting. The simple truth is this: your focus will shape your future. So be intentional about where you set your gaze, because what you look at will shape who you become. So here's the bottom line. Stop giving your best energy to things that won't even be here tomorrow. Stop letting temporary worries steal eternal joy. Stop fixing your gaze on things that crumble. Instead, fix your eyes on what is unshakable, unchanging, and everlasting. And let me close with this. When your eyes are fixed on forever, you will live differently today. You'll walk with confidence. You'll endure trials with hope. And you'll leave a legacy that outlives you. Because while everything around you may fade, what you build with eternity in mind will stand forever. So I challenge you, shift your focus, lift your vision, fix your eyes on what will last forever, and watch how your whole life changes when you stop chasing shadows and start walking in the light of what truly lasts. This morning, I came to remind you of something that could change your entire day, maybe even your entire life. Whatever is keeping you awake at night, whatever is making your chest heavy with fear, whatever is stealing your joy, today is the day you give it to God. You were never designed to carry the full weight of life by yourself. You were designed to walk in peace, rest, and faith. Worry has been your companion long enough. Anxiety has been whispering in your ear long enough. It's time to stop wrestling in your own strength and hand it over to the one who holds the world in his hands. When you say that God is bigger than what's breaking you, you are declaring a truth that your heart desperately needs to hear. That no matter how heavy the weight feels, no matter how painful the situation looks, it is not stronger than the one who holds your life together. Anxiety has a way of magnifying problems. It plays them on repeat in your mind until they seem too large to ever overcome. It whispers that you're trapped, that you're powerless, that you'll never get out of this situation. But faith does the exact opposite. Faith reminds you of the size of your God. Faith says, I will not stare at the storm when I can look at the one who calms the sea. Faith doesn't ignore reality, but it brings God's power into reality. Sometimes we get so consumed with what's breaking us, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the pressure, that we forget who is holding us. But the moment you stop and say, God, I trust you, something shifts. You are no longer carrying the full weight of the situation. You are handing it over to the one who not only sees the beginning from the end, but also has the strength to bring you through it. The same God who spoke the stars into existence with a single word is the one who knows your name. The same God who carved mountains and set oceans in place is the one who is concerned about what keeps you up at night. That is why the key to conquering anxiety is not in trying to fix everything on your own, but in remembering that God is bigger than all of it put together. Think about it this way. When a small child is frightened, they run to a parent and cling to them, not because the danger suddenly disappears, but because they feel safe in stronger arms. Your heavenly Father is inviting you to do the same. You may feel like your situation is too complicated, but nothing is too complicated for Him. You may feel like time has run out, but God is not limited by time. You may feel like you've made too many mistakes, but God's grace is greater than your failure. He is bigger than your past, your pain, and your fears about the future. Imagine a young woman named Sarah who lost her job unexpectedly. Rent was due, bills were piling up, and she felt crushed by fear. For a week, she stayed awake at night, replaying worst-case scenarios in her mind. But one night, she knelt by her bed and said, God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm giving this to you. The next morning, she woke up with a strange peace in her heart. 2 days later, she got a call for an interview at a company she hadn't even applied to. Someone had referred her name. Within a week, she had a job that paid more than her previous one and gave her flexible hours. Sarah didn't just get a job, she got a testimony that reminded her for the rest of her life that God really is bigger than what's breaking you. When you remind yourself of this truth, fear begins to lose its grip. Your circumstances might not change overnight, but your perspective does. Instead of seeing an impossible wall, you see a God who specializes in parting seas. Instead of feeling like you are being buried, you start to believe you might be planted. And when you carry that kind of faith, anxiety doesn't get the last word, God does. Prayer is not supposed to be the thing we do when everything else has failed. It is meant to be our first line of defense. Too often, we treat prayer like the emergency glass on the wall that says, break in case of trouble. We wait until we are at the end of our rope, exhausted, defeated, and out of options, and then we cry out to God. But prayer was never meant to be a desperate last act. It was meant to be a constant connection to the one who gives wisdom, peace, and strength long before the storm ever arrives. When you make prayer a daily rhythm, you stay aligned with God's perspective, and that perspective changes everything. Prayer is not begging. Prayer is not trying to convince God to care about you or your situation. Prayer is agreeing with what God has already said, stepping into His presence and allowing His will to be done in your life. It is like plugging your soul into a source of power. Just like a phone will eventually shut down if it isn't charged, your mind and spirit will grow weary if you are not connected to God regularly. Prayer recharges you, recenters you, and gives you clarity so you are not reacting to life from a place of fear, but from a place of faith. When you pray before the battle begins, you are already positioned for victory. It does not mean you will avoid every difficulty, but it does mean you will face those difficulties with courage and stability because you have already invited God into the situation. That is why the most powerful people are not always the loudest, the strongest, or the most educated. They are often the ones who know how to get on their knees and call on heaven before making a move. Prayer is not passive. It is the most active thing you can do. It calls the resources of heaven into the middle of your earthly problems. Think of it this way. Imagine a man named David who runs a small family business. He sees the economy taking a downturn, and instead of panicking, he wakes up every morning at 5 a.m. and prays for protection and provision. He doesn't just wait until his business is collapsing to cry out. Weeks later, when a financial challenge hits his town and other businesses begin to shut down, David is calm, while others scramble to make desperate decisions. He has clarity because his heart has been in constant conversation with God. He ends up pivoting his business early and turning what could have been a disaster into a breakthrough moment that expands his reach. David's success didn't come from luck. It came from being in alignment with God's guidance before the storm ever broke. Prayer changes things, but more importantly, it changes you. When you talk to God consistently, you begin to carry His peace into every situation. Worry cannot thrive where prayer is present. Anxiety loses its grip because prayer reminds you that you are not fighting alone. This is why prayer must be your weapon, your starting point, your strategy, not something you turn to only when all else has failed. When you live this way, storms will still come, but you will not be shaken because you are anchored in the one who never fails. Peace is one of the most powerful gifts God offers, but too many of us live without it because we are busy clinging to our worries. Worry feels like control, as if by thinking about the problem long enough, you might find a way to solve it. But in reality, worry only drains your strength, clouds your judgment, and keeps you awake at night without changing a single thing. God offers something far better, His peace. This peace is not simply the absence of conflict or a moment of quiet. It is a deep, unshakable calm that remains even when everything around you is chaotic. It is the kind of peace that holds you together when life tries to pull you apart. When you choose to hand over your anxieties to God, you are making a powerful exchange. You are saying, I will no longer carry this burden on my shoulders. I will place it on yours. This exchange does not mean the storm instantly disappears, but it does mean the storm inside of you goes silent. Peace is not a promise that life will be smooth. It is the assurance that you will not have to face the turbulence alone. God's peace guards your heart and mind, building a shield around your thoughts so fear no longer has the same power. Many people misunderstand peace and think it's only possible when everything is perfect. They wait until the bills are paid, the relationship is fixed, or the doctor calls with good news. But God's peace works in the middle of the waiting, in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of the pressure. It is supernatural because it does not depend on your circumstances, but on His presence. When you give Him your worry, He gives you something better, the ability to stand with confidence, even when you don't know how things will turn out. Imagine a man named Daniel who was waiting for a critical medical test result. For days, he felt consumed by fear. Every possible worst case scenario played through his mind like a movie on repeat. But one night, after feeling like he could not take the anxiety anymore, he got down on his knees and prayed. God, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I trust you with the outcome. As soon as he prayed, he felt a weight lift off his chest. The situation didn't change immediately. The test results were still coming. But Daniel changed. He went to sleep peacefully for the first time in a week. The next morning, he woke up calm, focused, and strong enough to face whatever came his way. A few days later, the results came back better than expected, but even if they hadn't, Daniel knew that God's peace would have carried him through. This is the power of the exchange. Worry will always come knocking on your door, but you don't have to invite it in. Every time fear rises up, you have an opportunity to trade it for peace. You do that through prayer, through trust, and through reminding yourself of who God is. The more you make that exchange, the more you realize that peace is not something you wait for. It is something you step into right in the middle of life's battles. And when you live in that kind of peace, anxiety loses its power, and you begin to experience life the way God intended, steady, confident, and full of hope, even in the storm. Anxiety begins in the mind, and that is where it must be confronted. The thoughts you allow to run through your head have the power to either build you up or tear you down. Worry thrives in silence. It grows stronger when you keep replaying negative scenarios without speaking truth to them. That is why speaking God's word over your mind is so powerful. When you open your mouth and declare what He has promised, you interrupt the cycle of fear. Your own ears hear your faith, and your heart begins to believe it. This is not about positive thinking or simply saying nice things to yourself. It is about agreeing with what God has already said about you and your situation. His word is not just information, it is a weapon. When you speak it, you are not just encouraging yourself, you are pushing back against fear and reminding the enemy that your mind belongs to God. There is a reason Scripture tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. Your words have creative power. When you speak defeat, you strengthen defeat. But when you speak faith, you strengthen your spirit. Anxiety cannot stand in the presence of God's truth. When your mind is screaming that you are alone, speak out loud. God is my refuge and my strength, an ever-present help in trouble. When your thoughts say you are not enough, declare, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When fear tells you the future is hopeless, say, for I know the plans he has for me. Plans to prosper me and not to harm me. Plans to give me a future and a hope. Every declaration is like light breaking into a dark room, pushing back the shadows little by little until you can see clearly again. Your thoughts often sound louder than God's promises until you speak his promises out loud. That is why this practice is so crucial. The mind is a battlefield, and you must actively fight for your peace. Left unchecked, negative thoughts multiply and spiral, but when you declare truth, you stop the spiral and turn it upward toward hope. This isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing to believe that even if things are not fine yet, God is still working. Faith comes by hearing, and sometimes you need to hear your own voice. Speak life over yourself. Consider the story of a young man named James who struggled with crippling anxiety every morning before work. His mind would flood with thoughts about failing, about not being good enough, about making mistakes. One day, instead of letting those thoughts run wild, he stood in front of his mirror and began speaking God's word over his day. God has not given me a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. I am strong and courageous. God is with me wherever I go. At first, it felt awkward, but after a few days, something shifted. His mornings no longer started with panic, but with strength. His coworkers noticed he was calmer, more confident, and more focused. His circumstances had not changed, but his mindset had, because he took control of his thoughts with the Word of God. This is the power of speaking truth over your mind. It is not just something you do once when life is falling apart. It is a habit you build every day. The more you do it, the stronger your mind becomes and the quicker fear loses its grip on you. Over time, you will find yourself less reactive, more steady, and filled with a quiet confidence that comes only from aligning your mind with God's promises. When you speak his word over your thoughts, you are building a fortress of peace that anxiety cannot easily penetrate. Releasing control is one of the hardest lessons in life, but it is also one of the most freeing. Most anxiety is born out of our desperate attempt to control what we cannot. We want to control the outcome, the timing, and even the process. But life rarely works that way. When you hold on too tightly, you wear yourself out trying to force things into place. Giving it to God means loosening your grip and admitting that you are not the one holding the universe together. He is. Trusting His timing is the next step. Because even when you finally let go of control, impatience will tempt you to take things back into your own hands. You might believe God will do it, but you want Him to do it now. Faith says, God, not only do I trust that you will make a way, but I also trust that you will do it at the right time. That kind of trust brings a deep rest into your soul because you no longer feel pressure to fix everything right this moment. Releasing control does not mean doing nothing. It means doing what you can in faith and leaving what you cannot in God's hands. It means choosing not to manipulate situations, not to force people to act a certain way, not to obsess over every detail you cannot change. When you step back and let God be God, you are opening the door for Him to work in ways you could never orchestrate. Often, what we think is a delay is actually God preparing something far better than we imagined. If you rush it, you may end up with something less than His best. But if you wait, you will see that His timing is perfect, even if it does not match your calendar. Learning to rest in God's timing also frees you from unnecessary stress. Worry cannot live where there is trust. When you believe that God knows what He is doing and that His plan is good, you can finally breathe. You do not need to know how. He will work it out to believe that He will. Rest doesn't come from having every answer. It comes from knowing the one who does. That is why people who truly trust God seem calm, even when their situation looks impossible. They know there is someone bigger than them who is writing the story, and they are content to let Him hold the pen. Imagine a woman named Maria who was praying for years to have a child. Every month that passed without an answer brought fresh pain. At first, she tried to make everything happen in her own strength, visiting every doctor she could find, obsessing over every detail, constantly feeling disappointed. One day, after another negative test result, Maria sat quietly and said, God, I can't carry this anymore. If you want to bless me with a child, I trust you to do it. And if you have a different plan, I trust that too. That moment was a turning point. She stopped living in constant disappointment and started living in peace. A year later, she unexpectedly found out she was pregnant, and her joy was complete. But even before that miracle, she had already found rest because she had surrendered the outcome and trusted God's timing. This is the beauty of releasing control. When you stop trying to force things to happen and trust God's process, you experience freedom. You start to see delays not as punishment, but as preparation. You stop running yourself into the ground, trying to fix everything, and start living with an unshakable confidence that the right doors will open at the right time. And when they do, You will be ready to walk through them without fear, because you know it was God who opened them. Going to sleep in peace and waking up in faith is one of the most practical and powerful ways to live free from anxiety. Nighttime is when worries seem the loudest. The day is over, the distractions are gone, and suddenly all your thoughts rush in at once. Your mind replays the mistakes you made, the conversations that hurt you, and the problems that have no solution yet. Instead of sleeping, you toss and turn as if somehow staying awake will help you fix things. But God never asked you to stay up all night, trying to solve what only He can solve. He invites you to lay it down and rest. Sleep becomes an act of surrender when you say, God, I trust you enough to stop striving. I trust you enough to close my eyes, knowing that you never sleep. Peace is not just something you hope for, it is something you receive. Before you go to bed, take a moment to release the weight you have been carrying all day. You might whisper, God, I can't carry this anymore, so I give it to you. I choose to trust you with my finances, my relationships, my health, my children, my future. When you do this, you are trading your restlessness for His peace. Your situation may not change overnight, but your heart will. The tension in your chest begins to ease, the racing thoughts begin to quiet, and sleep comes as a gift. This is why Scripture says God gives rest to those He loves, not just physical rest, but soul rest. When you wake up in the morning, you have a choice. Pick up yesterday's worry or pick up today's faith. Faith is what helps you get out of bed with hope, even if the problem is still there. It reminds you that every sunrise is proof that God has given you another chance, another opportunity to trust Him. Waking up in faith means expecting that something good can happen today, that this day could be the day things turn around, the day the prayer gets answered, the day the breakthrough comes. This mindset sets the tone for your entire day. Instead of dreading what's ahead, you face it with courage and hope. Imagine a man named Samuel who had been waiting months to hear back about a job he desperately needed. Every night, he would sit in bed with his phone in his hand, refreshing his email over and over, unable to sleep. He was exhausted and frustrated, and his anxiety only grew worse. One night, he decided to try something different. He turned off his phone, sat on the edge of his bed, and prayed, God, I am giving this to you tonight. You can handle this better than I can. I'm going to sleep, and I trust that when I wake up, you will still be in control. That night, he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The next morning, he woke up with renewed energy and a quiet confidence that God was working behind the scenes. 2 days later, he got the job offer he had been waiting for. But even before that call came, Samuel had already won the battle in his mind by choosing to rest and trust God. This is what it means to go to sleep in peace and wake up in faith. It is not just a routine. It is a declaration that you believe God is present in both the night and the morning. Your sleep becomes an offering of trust, and your waking becomes a statement of hope. When you live like this, worry loses its power over you, because you have learned to give the night to God and take the morning with confidence. This is your moment to breathe again, to trust again, to believe again. Anxiety and worry may come knocking at your door tomorrow, but they no longer get to live in your house. You have given it to God, and when you give it to Him, He gives you back His peace, His strength, and His joy. So take a deep breath. Lift your head. Your Father in heaven is already working on what you've been worrying about. Tonight, sleep like someone who knows God is in control.